the flickering light of an ancient fresco barely illuminates. A scene of judgment, stone faces, etched with sorrow and fear, await a decree. But what was this reckoning meant to convey? For millennia, humanity has wrestled with mortality and the unsettling prospect of what might lie beyond the veil. Before Christianity's elaborate vision of eternal damnation took root, concepts of afterlife punishment existed in shadow. Consider Zoroastrianism, an ancient Persian religion, where a cosmic battle raged between good and evil. Ahriman, the embodiment of darkness, awaited souls condemned to a realm of perpetual suffering, a chilling echo of what would later become known as hell. Similarly, the Greeks envisioned a complex underworld, ruled by Hades. Tartarus, a dark abyss, served as a place of torment for those deemed unworthy. These weren't necessarily punishments in the Christian sense, but rather destinations reflecting moral consequence, a reflection of deeds done during earthly life. Mesopotamia offered its own grim vision, a shadowy underworld filled with lost souls and restless spirits. The belief that one's actions would determine their fate after death was a remarkably consistent thread woven through ancient cultures, suggesting an innate human preoccupation with justice and consequence. Yet, these early concepts differed greatly from the specific imagery of Christian hell. The flames, the devils, the meticulously detailed punishments. What prompted this shift? What forces shaped the development of this particular doctrine? As Christianity emerged from Judaism, it inherited a legacy of judgment and punishment. Sheol, the Hebrew term for the underworld, initially held no concept of eternal torment. However, over time, the idea of Gehenna, a valley near Jerusalem associated with purification fires, gained prominence. Gehenna wasn't simply a place of destruction. It was envisioned as a fiery cleansing, a way to burn away sin and impurities. This offered a more nuanced approach than outright annihilation, aligning somewhat with the prevailing Jewish understanding of divine justice. But even this concept evolved dramatically within Christian theology. The influence of figures like Augustine in the late Roman Empire solidified the notion of hell as a place of eternal separation from God, a consequence of rejecting grace and embracing sin. It became increasingly linked to concepts of divine wrath and retribution. Dante Alighieri's Inferno, penned in the 14th century, irrevocably transformed this vision. Dante's descent through 9 circles of hell, each filled with horrific punishments tailored to specific sins, imprinted a vivid and emotionally charged image onto Western consciousness. It wasn't merely theological doctrine that shaped this understanding. It was art, literature, and imagination. Dante's depiction became the standard, by which subsequent generations measured their own conceptions of hell, profoundly influencing everything from religious iconography to popular culture. But how did this single work so powerfully shape our collective imagination? And what factors contributed to its enduring impact across centuries? The echoes of Dante's Inferno lingered, a stark depiction of eternal punishment rooted in scripture and human interpretation. Yet the question remained, was this truly the only way to understand divine justice? Scholars began to challenge the simplistic notion that hell was simply a consequence of sin. Early Christian theologians wrestled with reconciling God's perfect love with the existence of suffering in the world. If God is all-powerful and infinitely good, why does evil persist? This question fueled debates about predestination, the belief that God has already determined who will be saved and who will be damned. The concept of conditional immortality emerged as a potential solution, suggesting that salvation hinged on specific conditions, rather than simply accepting or rejecting God's grace. However, this created further complexities regarding divine justice. How could an all-knowing God truly condemn someone without knowing their capacity for repentance? Moving eastward, alternative perspectives offered solace and shifted the focus away from punitive judgment. Buddhist teachings, emphasizing compassion and the cyclical nature of rebirth, presented a vastly different understanding of suffering, not as punishment, but as consequence of karma. The rise of secular humanism in the modern era further challenged traditional theological frameworks. Philosophers like Nietzsche questioned the very notion of an objective moral order, suggesting that concepts of good and evil were socially constructed rather than divinely ordained. Yet, even within Christianity, dissenting voices began to emerge. Jürgen Moltmann, a prominent German theologian, argued for a transcendent justice, a God who actively intervenes in the world to alleviate suffering and restore brokenness. This challenged the traditional image of hell as a passive recipient of divine wrath. Neurological research added another layer to the debate, questioning the very foundations of human free will. Studies examining brain activity suggested that our choices might be shaped by subconscious processes beyond our conscious control, raising fundamental questions about moral responsibility and accountability. The landscape of theological thought shifted again. With the rise of annihilationism, the belief that upon death, those consigned to hell would simply cease to exist, eliminating the possibility of eternal torment. This offered a more merciful interpretation, aligning with a God of compassion and forgiveness. Exploring these diverse viewpoints reveals a fascinating tension, the enduring appeal of the concept of hell, alongside increasing challenges to its traditional justification. What assumptions about divine justice are being questioned by modern thought? The persistent questions surrounding hell continued to ripple through intellectual and theological currents, a restless undercurrent beneath the surface of faith. Examining its evolution revealed not a monolithic doctrine, but a complex tapestry woven from ancient beliefs, philosophical arguments, and shifting cultural values. Consider the concept of mercy itself. Traditional interpretations often frame divine justice as demanding retribution for sin. Yet countless religious texts, both within Christianity and other faiths, emphasize God's boundless compassion and forgiveness. How could these seemingly contradictory impulses coexist? The debate centered not just on where souls went after death, but on the very nature of that destination. Was it a place of eternal suffering, or a state of non-existence, or perhaps something entirely beyond human comprehension? Ancient notions of punishment often mirrored societal norms, retribution for transgressions against social order. However, as societies evolved and moral codes shifted, so too did the understanding of justice and accountability. The concept of hell began to reflect evolving anxieties about sin, mortality, and the consequences of our actions. The rise of monasticism in medieval Europe offered a contrasting perspective, a focus on inward purification through contemplation and self-denial, rather than external judgment. This shift reflected a growing emphasis on individual responsibility for one's spiritual state. Furthermore, examining historical practices of punishment reveals a stark contrast between the imagined horrors of hell and the often brutal realities of earthly justice. Torture chambers and public executions served as chilling reminders that even in life, human cruelty could mirror the concept of divine retribution. Modern theologians increasingly grapple with the problem of evil, not just the existence of suffering, but how it can be reconciled with the belief in an all-powerful and loving God. Theodicy, the attempt to justify God's actions in light of evil, remains a central challenge for faith. The concept of free will, often considered essential to moral responsibility, is now subject to intense scrutiny by neuroscientists who argue that our choices may be largely determined by unconscious processes beyond our control. If human agency is limited, does this diminish the basis for assigning blame or deserving punishment? Ultimately, exploring these diverse perspectives illuminates a profound paradox: the enduring power of the idea of hell, alongside a growing awareness of its inherent difficulties, and perhaps even its limitations, as a framework for understanding faith and morality. The persistent questioning surrounding hell reveals a fundamental tension, a struggle to reconcile faith's promises of redemption with the undeniable presence of suffering and injustice in the world. It's a debate, not merely about geography or punishment, but about the very nature of divine love and human responsibility. Examining historical responses to this dilemma demonstrates a fascinating pattern. Throughout history, individuals have sought to alleviate suffering through acts of charity, social reform, and personal sacrifice, often framing these actions as expressions of God's will. Yet, the specter of hell continued to loom large, providing a framework for understanding divine judgment. Consider how different cultures have attempted to address the problem of evil, from ancient Mesopotamian concepts of cosmic balance disrupted by sin, to the Christian emphasis on original sin and the need for redemption through Christ. Each attempt grapples with the apparent contradiction between a benevolent God and a world riddled with pain. The rise of existentialism in the 20th century offered a radical alternative, rejecting predetermined notions of meaning and morality, placing ultimate responsibility squarely on the individual's shoulders. If there is no inherent divine order, then we are responsible for creating our own values and navigating the complexities of existence without relying on external authorities. However, this shift towards individual autonomy doesn't necessarily negate the desire for a sense of justice or accountability. Many individuals continue to seek meaning beyond the purely subjective, longing for a transcendent connection with something larger than themselves. Exploring religious traditions outside the Western Judeo-Christian framework reveals diverse approaches to suffering and death. Buddhist concepts of reincarnation and karma offer a cyclical understanding of existence, where actions in this life shape future rebirths, shifting focus from eternal punishment to ongoing consequence. The concept of divine mystery emerges as a crucial element, acknowledging that certain questions may lie beyond the reach of human comprehension. Perhaps hell isn't meant to be understood through rational analysis, but experienced through faith and trust in a divine power greater than ourselves. Ultimately, confronting the question of hell demands an honest appraisal of both our own beliefs and the limitations of our understanding. It requires a willingness to embrace ambiguity and acknowledge that the pursuit of truth is often more valuable than definitive answers. The very act of grappling with this enduring dilemma can deepen one's faith or lead to a profound reevaluation of it all. The journey through the history and theology of hell ultimately circles back to a fundamental human yearning, a desire for meaning in the face of uncertainty. It's not about definitively proving or disproving its existence, but rather about exploring what it represents, a reflection of our deepest anxieties and aspirations. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of this ongoing debate isn't the destination itself, but the process of questioning, the relentless pursuit of truth that defines human inquiry. The very act of wrestling with these profound questions can be a transformative experience, fostering intellectual humility and a deeper appreciation for the complexities of faith. Moving beyond rigid doctrines encourages a more compassionate understanding of suffering, recognizing it not as divine punishment, but as a shared aspect of the human condition. This perspective shifts the focus from judgment to empathy, prompting us to alleviate pain and injustice wherever we find it. The persistent presence of hell serves as a potent reminder that our moral compass is constantly under construction, shaped by evolving knowledge, cultural values, and personal experiences. It's not a fixed point, but a dynamic concept, subject to ongoing interpretation and reevaluation. Ultimately, the question of whether or not hell exists may be less important than the questions it compels us to ask about justice, mercy, free will, and the nature of reality itself. It's an invitation to engage in a lifelong dialogue with our beliefs and values. Consider the legacy of this debate. Across centuries, countless individuals have found solace, inspiration, or renewed conviction through grappling with these challenging ideas. Whether they embraced traditional doctrines or forged their own path, the exploration of hell has profoundly shaped their understanding of faith and life. The enduring fascination with hell suggests a deep-seated human need to confront mortality, to acknowledge our limitations, and grapple with the unknown. It's an expression of our profound desire for meaning. In a world often characterized by chaos and suffering, let us not seek definitive answers, but rather embrace the questions themselves, recognizing that the pursuit of truth is itself a worthwhile endeavor. May we approach these complex issues with humility, compassion, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions. Finally, consider this. Perhaps the most profound legacy of hell isn't a place of eternal torment, but the catalyst for cultivating a more just, compassionate, and meaningful world. One action, one conversation, one reflection at a time. This video has come to an end, but the discovery continues. Check out more content on the channel and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for watching.